You're watching Beyond Market. Welcome, I'm Esther Awuni. Many thanks for joining us. Coming up on today's show, we'll find out how we can ensure food security in Nigeria. Remember, you can join the conversation by using the hashtag Beyond Markets, and you can follow my Twitter handle too, at Esther Ubudaga. Now, the insurgency in northeastern Nigeria, climate change and low crop yields are just some of the threats to food security in Nigeria. Antti Ritvoren, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer at Dizengoff Nigeria, Taiwo Ajose, Commodity Merchant, and Akintunde Sawyerr, Executive Secretary, Agricultural Fresh Produce Growers and Exporters Association, join me now to discuss how Nigeria can ensure food security. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you on today's show. So I was talking earlier about what the statistics say right now about our food production and how close we are, how the threats are right now in terms of food security, and they don't look too good. But I want us to start by everyone sharing your perspective on what you see the threats to be right now as they are, what you think the threats are to Nigeria's food security. Akintunde, I'll start with you.
Okay, so the threats, as I see them, are a lack of planning in terms of food production, a lack of understanding the demand from the various demand centers, and really a lack of proper infrastructure, either to move food around, so I mean trucking, roads, and of course storage as well, to ensure that there's some sort of optimization around uptake and use, and rather than sort of leaving spoilage to take hold, which is a major threat in my view.
Okay, Antti, your perspective?
Well, I think like generally the problem in Nigeria is that it's farming methods are very old-fashioned, very manual. So it's a question of farmers' knowledge and training them. Mechanization level is very low. We are well behind other African countries, and then all the inputs that are being used, the quality or the standard of them varies very much. So you don't really know what you get.
So basically, the value chain, as it were, problems with that.
Yeah. If I can add something, that then of course the other thing, when we talk about mechanization, then there is the problems are affordable finance, and the farm size is obviously a challenge, which then farms are generally very small, so it's difficult for them to actually go with these modern methods and move forward in mechanization. Okay. And this area.
Taiwo, your thoughts?
Well, from a merchant's perspective, because they've addressed the other aspects, I'd say logistics is the major factor, and storage. It's a well-known fact that quite a lot of the food is produced, but a lot of it goes to waste from off the farm to getting into storage. And some of the practices, like you say, are, should we say, not the best. For instance, when you see people threshing grain, they still do it manually, and there's a lot of wastage right from the beginning. So there are myriad reasons which are well documented, but these are from our perspective what you see. Logistics is truly a big problem.
Okay, so these are common problems that we know about, that we talk about all the time. So in your perspective also, let's also talk about what we see being done, either by the farmers themselves or the farmers in collaboration with the government, to ensure that we minimize waste. I mean, we've talked for so long, for decades, about having silos, I mean, storing perishables like tomatoes that come all the way from the north down to the south. I mean, almost half of them perish before they get here. And of course, that leads to higher prices. And, it just doesn't make any sense. So, but in your perspective, Akin, to tell us what you see in terms of how we're tackling, especially the issue of logistics, and ensuring that we preserve as much as we can food that we produce.
Okay, that's a really good question. And in terms of the positives and the things that I have noticed have been happening over a period of time that positively impact the sector, I see a growing number of intelligent, well-educated, well-exposed farmers coming into play. I think if you roll the clock back 20 or 30 years, the farmers tended to be the uneducated rural dwellers. Today you see doctors, lawyers, engineers, all saying, look, we haven't got access to other ways necessarily, or we're bored with the professions that we're in, we want to get into farming. So there's a little bit more of the thoughtful farmer coming to the fore. I think the other thing that we're starting to see is that there is an attitude now that goes more towards supplying food in a just-in-time manner rather than a just-in-case manner, because of some of the issues and challenges that we've had with power and storage and roads. People are starting to think more carefully about how much they should produce so that the market can take it. So there's a sort of increased or improved attitude towards producing to demand rather than just producing for the sake of demand of producing. I think the third thing that I've noticed is that there are a number of initiatives that have looked at how packaging can work. So, if you provide the right packaging, whether it's vacuum sealed or plastic crates instead of baskets, there's again a positive impact. And I've seen a number of initiatives, particularly from NGOs who are trying to see how they can improve the yield for the farmers. So those are some of the positive impacts or positive approaches that I've seen taking root.
Okay, now before we go further, there's one major factor that we've left out here, and it's in the news almost on a daily basis, and that's the crisis, the herdsmen, farmers' crisis in the northeastern and especially in the middle belt states like Benue, which we call the food basket of the nation, and a place like Plateau State, that was also in the news recently. And I've spoken to a number of agriculture experts, and they keep telling me that, look, and also people who have worked on the ground with these farmers. I had someone from Farm Crowdy a couple of days ago, and she said, look, I've been on the ground, I've been with these farmers, and the threat is real. Many of them have packed up and literally left their farms. And these are areas that produce large volumes of food that are supposed to go from that part of the country down to the south and other parts of the country. So taking that out from the number, the food that we expect in terms of volumes coming down to other parts of the country, it all adds up at some point. So perhaps, Taiwo, share with us what you think or how we're tackling the issue of insecurity and how it's a major threat to food security.
Well, you've actually documented one of the issues we've been looking at. As you know, Benue is the main producer of yams in the country, and actually that problem has existed now for probably since last season, and any watcher or wife running a home will have noticed that the price of yams never went down over the last year. And it is true, if you are on ground, so to speak, the farmers are not venturing deeper or far away from their homesteads to produce. Now, is it being addressed? To be honest, I don't think so. And it is very difficult to address that sort of problem. I mean, the problems of security are so widespread. Where do you start? And the only way you could say maybe it would be addressed is if the farmers moved to other states and started producing, which some have, or if the other states which produce the same food gear up on their production. But really, I don't see how it can be practically addressed unless you have unless you're going to have security people sort of looking over farms, which is almost impossible.
Because many of them obviously, are in remote areas and span over, several kilometers of. I see your point, Antti. What are your thoughts on this in terms of how the government, especially because we're looking to the security agencies, and the government has also said that we're doing all that we can to protect many of these farmers and farms to ensure that that doesn't compound the seriousness of the situation, as it were.
Yeah, well, I think I do agree that I don't think this issue or problem has been really at all addressed in a seriousness that it would require. And obviously, if there is this kind of security risk in place, then you cannot expect anybody to invest seriously or really commit to your business or to your farm if you are under this kind of security risk at all times. So that is, I would say, the basic requirement for any business, to have a secure environment where you can do your thing. And if that doesn't exist, then I don't think you can expect any any positive
So for
results.
an investor, I mean, who is here and has seen the opportunities and perhaps was here before the crisis, happened,
Correct.
are you beginning to say, do I begin to re-strategize? Do I begin to move locations, look at other parts of the country?
Well, I'm absolutely sure that is happening. And then, of course, I think there is like when we talk about Nigeria, there is, I think, well, this security is obviously one thing. Like really, and especially like in certain parts, it's a really big issue. But then there is like if we talk about investors, then there is like other general topic is that how business friendly environment Nigeria is, whether it's agriculture or any other business. That is it the easy and nice environment to do business? And I think that is also something in a more generally that needs to be addressed.
No, it's interesting because, I mean, we know about the the enabling business environment and the fact that we moved up in the World Bank ranking on the ease of doing business. But it would appear that we did well in areas, but when you look at the agriculture sector where, I mean, the investment is on the farm, on the farms, you've invested in equipment, you've invested in seeds and all of that, but there is no corresponding security, as it were, to protect those investments. Yes, you were able to register the business. Yes, policies are okay, but the actual farming, the actual work where you're going to get recoup your investment is at risk because marauding herdsmen have come and chased the farmers, killed some of them, and they're just taken over the land and even renamed it, as it were, in some cases. What do you do then, Akintunde?
Well, it's as Taiwo said, and as Antti just more or less confirmed, security is a major issue. Security is an important element of the cost of doing business wherever you are. You always have to build in the cost of security. And of course, if the cost of security exceeds a particular level, then actually the business is not viable, whether it's farming or transporting or storage. This is a threat not just to farmers. So even if you secure the farm, the produce must leave the farm. It must get on the road and go to the next place. If there isn't security there, there's another issue. So when you rightly say, yes, this is ease of doing business and this is agriculture, agriculture goes beyond the farm. And security must be taken into account. In terms of what can be done, I think, a point was already made that, look, sometimes you have to move the location of your production. So that may mean moving to another state. It could be temporary. It could be permanent. We all saw what happened in Zimbabwe many years ago when the white farmers came under threat and some of them relocated to Nigeria. That was a security issue. And they came over here to see if they could improve on what they were doing in an environment that they felt was more secure. It is a challenge. We're going to have to look at it very carefully. Mechanization has a role to play. Change of location has a role to play. Ease of doing business has a role to play. But above all, security of lives and property are critical. Nobody can do business with a gun to their head.
Absolutely. We'll take a short break. I thank you for your time so far. We'll take a short break and I'll come and pick up from where we left off. I've been speaking to Antti Ritvoren, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer at Dizengoff Nigeria, Taiwo Ajose, Commodity Merchant, and Akintunde Sawyerr, Executive Secretary, Agricultural Fresh Produce Growers and Exporters Association. We're looking at tackling food insecurity in Nigeria. We're discussing ways to ensure food security in Nigeria, and my guests today are Antti Ritvoren, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer at Dizengoff Nigeria, Taiwo Ajose, Commodity Merchant, and Akintunde Sawyerr, Executive Secretary, Agricultural Fresh Produce Growers and Exporters Association. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time so far. Now, we talked about what the challenges are, as they stand right now, what the threats are. But let's talk about what, starting with the government, is doing in terms of, from a policy perspective, to address some of these issues. Now, earlier this year, as you all know, the federal government inaugurated the National Food Security Council. Now, part of the mandate of this of the council, which is made up of 6 governors representing 6 geographical areas in the country, they're mandated to assess existing food security policies, trade and national planning programs guaranteeing food security, and of course also hoping to create jobs in the process. What are your thoughts on this initiative in terms of how they're going to sit down and assess what the threats are and how they're going to begin to tackle them. And for you, where would you say they should start? Should be a starting point for this council, Akintunde?
Okay, so I think, the starting point for this council is how they assess their own performance. I think one of the things that we're extremely good at in this part of the world is inaugurating committees and bringing people together, giving them new titles and saying to them, this is what you need to do. What we're not terribly good at is measuring what these groups are doing, what these committees are doing. So the inauguration is fine, everybody gets a handshake and takes a bow, but how do they monitor their own performance? Who is monitoring their own effectiveness? So, I'm not seeking to create an additional layer of bureaucracy, but I am saying, look, we have got inaugurated a Food Security Council. That's great in itself, but are we going to get an answer? What are the timelines? What is their mandate tell us about what they're going to actually achieve or be able to achieve? And then how do they self-renew? This is a continuous issue. It's not about inaugurating one Food Security Council and then at the end of the political cycle that disappears, because food security goes long, way beyond, April, when they were inaugurated, to February next year or to May when there's a new government coming in. We need to be thinking much more long term and mixing these groups such that we can go beyond, if you like.
Continuity.
Yes. The other thing I'd be very keen to know is, are there any laymen on these councils? So is this just, more work for governors, more work for permanent secretaries, more titles for other types of people? Where are the ordinary people represented in these food security councils or any other committee for that matter? Because if you don't have laymen who are down on the ground, not in jeeps, not in Land Cruisers rolling around in 10-car convoys, where are the people who have boots on the ground who actually depend on the success of these committees?
Now, Antti, when you hear about such a council being inaugurated, as an investor, what would be your expectations? What would be your hopes?
Well, I think actually I would like what my colleague Akin here say in the end, that I think these kind of committees will only work if they are very close with the private sector and actually work together with farmers and farmers associations, because there is a limitations what the government can do by themselves if they don't engage with the farmers. So, because obviously the farmers are the ones who really know what are the problems that they are facing. So it's really generally I would say that if government wants to move agriculture forward, it is by working closely together with the farmers and the private sector, because private sector is the one who will eventually make it happen or not make it happen. So
now, I imagine they'll work with the private sector. Taiwo, what are your thoughts in terms of what kind of impact you will be expecting this council to have?
Well, I think we should first recommend them for actually even establishing such a council and recognizing that food security is important. But as my two panelists have said, it's one thing to inaugurate a council. Who constitutes the council? Is it operating on such a high level that you actually don't reach the people who it's intended to influence or to assist? And this tends to be what happens with a lot of these government ideas. They're excellent on paper, but then it's the practical implementation and execution of these councils is what we need to understand.
Okay, Antti, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can just comment on this, when you say private sector, obviously it needs to be, I think it's a fair comment that it should not be just corporations, or it needs to be the whole spectre of these players in the agriculture, and obviously very much including also all the small farmers, because most of the farmers, very big majority of the farmers are very small in Nigeria. But if you want to really make things happen, they need to be also very much involved, and their views needs to be taken into consideration.
Now, let me ask you this, as an investor here, as an operator here in Nigeria, obviously you had high hopes, and I guess you also had realistic expectations, looking at the terrain, the risks levels, and engaging that against your strategy and the future growth of your business here in Nigeria. What are your thoughts right now as it stands? And when you look into the future and you look at how things are being handled now by the government and tackling issues that directly affect your business and the future growth of your business, what are you thinking to yourself? Do I re-strategize? Do I cut my losses? Do I look at other regions in sub-Saharan Africa? Do I just ride out these challenges?
I mean, I think on the other hand, it would be easy to like list all these challenges that there are in Nigeria and doing business in Nigeria. Yes, there are challenges and problems. But if we talk about the agriculture in Nigeria, I actually do see a huge potential, really huge potential. I would say the potential is greater than, I don't think Nigerians I think Nigerians don't actually understand what is really the potential. Nigeria can be one of the really great countries of agriculture. There is a lot of good farming land and there is like all the elements in place. And I think also what earlier in this discussion my colleague Akin said, I think what is really, I would say, that gives me hope is that there is like a businessmen who are maybe already well established in Nigeria in some other areas. They actually are seeing agriculture is now an area where to go into. And like if agriculture in Nigeria properly managed, professionally managed, is a very good business.
Okay, Akintunde, I mean, from the exporter's point of view, how is this, what are your hopes then? First of all, how is it directly impacting your business? Are you seeing an impact on your business in terms of the challenges as they are? And what are your expectations in terms of how things can get better?
Okay, so first of all, there are clearly challenges. When you look at it from an export perspective, you have to cross borders. You have to cross state borders in some cases, but more interestingly, you have to cross international borders. There are bottlenecks on the local side, which are often contrived, and there are bottlenecks on the international side, which are to do with standards and food safety. The challenges that we face on the ground compromise the food safety standards which must be met if you're going to get food, for example, into Europe. Just to comment on the potential and what is driving a lot of people to look at agriculture, the food business in the United Kingdom is £200 billion a year. The food business in Nigeria must be 4 times that. Okay, so in terms of production and back to what my colleague Antti said, we have huge potential. But we do have these contrived bottlenecks. We do have these issues and challenges around security, around education, around the importance of measuring what you're doing before you do it, not just producing because you can. You produce to demand. And how do we begin to measure that? You see a whole raft of IT companies now. Everybody's is setting up one platform or the other, looking at pricing, giving information about where the demand is. All of these things negate the need in some cases for power even, because if you know where the demand is, you can produce to that demand without having to look for power to store. We need to take advantage of some of these other advances in technology. Having Zuckerberg and Bill Gates, and all these guys coming here, we need to try to understand how we can leverage the technology they have to help farmers and lock straight into companies like my colleague's company here who provide mechanization and are on the ground. They're not just importing, they're actually on the ground providing practical solutions. Merchants like Taiwo here, who have spent through the better part of 3.5 decades just trying to understand and improve the process all the time. How do we all work together to ensure that there is the dream and hope realized for the ordinary farmer? Because
at the end of the day, because what we're talking about here is food security, at the end of the day is, are we able to produce enough for us to feed ourselves and possibly also export?
I think
Final thoughts.
I think Nigeria has proven, when you look at the rice production, that when the government is committed and serious, we can actually do things.
Okay, Antti, final words, 5 seconds.
Well, I think one thing is that you usually think that we will not get to the top very quickly, but there are small little steps that we can do where the results can be big.
Okay, Akintunde.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've got to take this in incremental steps. The problem we've got at the moment is that we also need to recognize that there are opportunities to leapfrog. We don't have to make the mistake that others have made. How do we leapfrog? How do we take on some of that advantage, technological
Okay.
or otherwise, and leapfrog into the future.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on today's show. I've been speaking to Antti Ritvoren, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Dizengoff Nigeria, Taiwo Ajose, Commodity Merchant, and Akintunde Sawyerr, Executive Secretary, Agricultural Fresh Produce Growers and Exporters Association.